All right. So yesterday we kind of got through. We talked quite a bit about classes, talked decent about importing and exporting, and we even got to the point of doing a simple project, a React project setup. I don't think there's much we could do about the sun. Hitting it just right to completely dim it. So what we're going to move into this morning is talking about components. So components are a huge part of React and kind of one of the things that makes React useful. But one thing we didn't really talk about yesterday was kind of what React is in general. I know I kind of went on a small little diatribe about React, but can anybody in their own words tell me what React is? We want to take a stab at it? Shot in the dark?
JavaScript library.
JavaScript library? Yes. Anybody want to expand on that? I mean, you're right. So, so it's a JavaScript library. One interesting thing about that is it does call itself a library, which initially I kind of had a hard time with because there is a technical difference between a library and a framework. A framework, you're very constricted on how you have to build everything. And initially I kind of felt React was more of a framework than a library. Something like jQuery would be considered more of a library because it's just you can use it or not use it. And, you do all kinds of things around it. jQuery doesn't really care. And while that's not 100% true with React, React is still very, very freeing with what you could do with it, especially compared to something like Angular. Angular is definitely a lot more rigid than React. So in a loose sense, I guess React can be considered a library, and that's what Facebook considers it. They consider it a library. One good thing about React, too, is you could, if you have an existing website, you could just include, just a piece of it to actually use React. The whole website does not have to be built in React. Now, everything we're going to be doing here, the whole website is going to be built in React. But you could theoretically add, React components to just different pieces of the website. If you guys remember, yesterday we saw React DOM.render, and we told it which component or which DOM element to render inside of. So you could have DOM elements anywhere on a normal page and have React rendering inside of it. So you could very easily add it to different pages, kind of isolated from the website as a whole. So in that regards, you could definitely go towards the library side of things. With that said, there are still some kind of constructs that you do need to stay with inside of for React. And one of the big things that React does is divide everything up into components. Does anybody want to take a shot in the dark of what a component might be? Cool. Anybody?
I mean,
you got to go first. Thank you guys.
If I can take a guess, I would say the component is probably like an object.
Okay.
I would say any piece of UI that you can just reuse.
Okay. Correct. It can technically be an object, but more directly, in programming terms, it can be an object. As far as the broader sense of what it is in React, it's a piece of the user interface. So take the Google homepage. I always like to use this because it's a nice, simple example. They took minimalist to a whole new level and succeeded greatly with it. So an example of a component might be a nav bar. So although it doesn't look like it goes all the way across, it probably does. up here there's a nav bar on the page, and then in the nav bar there's 4 different items. So the nav bar itself might be a component. Those 4 different items might be made up of a few different components. Maybe there's 3 components that are links and 1 that handles the user icon and all that stuff. So maybe 3 different components to build out those 4 items. Another example of a component would be kind of the main content here. Maybe a separate component for the logo, and then another component that handles all the search functionality. And then all of those components would sit inside of the app component. So yesterday you guys saw, whether you realize it or not, everything kind of starts with the app component and then branches out from there. So you have kind of one main component, and then all your other components feed into that to ultimately build your whole page. And a lot of times people have kind of a hard time wrapping your brain around, well, how can one component build a whole website? But that's what you've been doing all along. What's the one DOM element that holds the whole website?
The body.
The body, right? You have the body, and then inside the body you have other DOM elements. Inside of those you have other DOM elements, and they branch out to ultimately build a whole website. So it's the same concept. It's what you've been doing all along. This is structured slightly differently. So there's 2 main types of components in React. There's subsets of those components, but we're going to focus just kind of on the higher level, broader idea of each of the 2 different types of components. One of which is functional components, which are built using functions, hence the name functional component. Another name for functional components is dumb components, because they don't really do too much. All they do is show stuff on the screen for the most part. They don't have, any intelligence, so to speak. And I feel that's a little derogatory towards components, so I won't call them that. But you will see that on the internet. The other type of components is class components. What do you think we build those with?
Classes.
Completely wrong. We build them with for loops. No, yeah. Of course it's classes. Missed opportunity. They're not called classical components though, which I'm still sad about every time I have to talk about it. But a class component is built with a class that extends a pre-built class in React called component. And a class component gives you a lot more functionality than a functional component does. So we're going to start with the simple one first. We'll talk about functional components. And then I think we'll probably have enough time to actually even get into class components today. And all the fun that comes with that. So let us start by opening your terminal and going to your LFC folder. Once in your LFC folder, go to your front end folder and then into the React starter folder. So front end and then React starter. Yesterday, for the examples we were doing, we made a branch called React Intro. We're done with that branch for now, so I want everyone to, get status, get add, get commit. Should always get status before you add and commit. I'm sure you've already been told this, but maybe not explained really well, possibly. Does anybody know why we would want to do a get status before we add and commit? Shot in the dark?
See if anything's changed.
See what's changed. See if, A, do we even need to add and commit? Okay? Especially like after we did really bad practices and left it on the branch last night and didn't add and commit anything. At the end of your workday, you should always be adding, committing, and pushing your work, because what if your computer blows up overnight? It happens. Also, we want to do git status to make sure we're not adding stuff that we don't intend to add. Right now, it's not that big of an issue, but you're going to end up with like password files and stuff that you don't necessarily want to push to GitHub. And all that stuff should be get ignored, but we're all people and we can all make mistakes. So doing a git status before every add and commit kind of makes you do a quick overview to make sure you're not adding stuff you didn't intend to. And the exact opposite, making sure you are adding everything you intend to. Make sure nothing's missing. If you're in a different folder in your project, you type git add period. What does period mean? Nope, does not mean everything. Current directory. It's a huge misconception with that git command you guys have been doing. And it's our fault. Every class does it. But period, when dealing with folder file structures, period means current working directory. So if you have CD'd down into your project somewhere and you type git add period, you're not going to be adding all the files for that project possibly. So you always want to make sure you're in the root directory, or there is a command that will guarantee to add everything for that repo, and git add -- all. Right? That will add everything for the repo no matter what directory you're in. But when you say git add period, you're saying add everything for this directory and all of its subfolders, everything this directory contains. For the most part, that's okay. A lot of actual jobs will prefer you to add one file at a time, because you can actually specify, I want to git add a specific folder or file. Okay, and that will just add that one thing. And it's a little bit more step by step. Some companies prefer that. It's a little bit, arguably a little bit safer. But ain't nobody got time for that. So, yes.
So yesterday you were saying package/lock.json is easy to make conflict when we merge. So why don't we just get ignored since it's going to go by?
It's an efficiency thing, and NPM suggests that you let it be added to the repo. Because it helps, like when you're NPM installing, it helps everything to work better together. It helps keep track of all the packages. That's its whole point, is to kind of keep a relationship map of all the different packages that are installed, all their dependencies and all that. So it's an efficiency thing. So if it's not there, it takes longer to actually NPM install anything, and it has to rebuild all that and remap everything out. So you just, every once in a while, you're going to get a merge conflict in it. It's not a huge deal, but it's still better to keep it there. Yeah. And like what we're doing like right now as a class, we probably won't have any issues with it. The real issue becomes when you have multiple people on the same project and different people are NPM installing stuff and you guys aren't merging often enough. That's usually where where it becomes a problem. So for the commit message, we'll just say come React. And although in the beginning we had you do very specific Git messages, when you're doing your prototypes, we tell you put the prototype name, your name. That was just to help us review and grade your prototypes. In the real world, you don't need to put your name in the Git message because it's associated with your GitHub account, so there's no real reason to put your name. We have you do that here just because we're in the beginning, we're trying to get to know all your guys' names, plus a lot of times your GitHub names don't match your real names. You know, you get, Dragonfly5 and realize that, that's Cody. So, like, you never know. So we have you do that in the beginning, but just know it's not necessarily standard practice to put your name in the commit messages. All that matters about the commit message is that it's descriptive of what you accomplished. And different companies will have different standards for how they want you to format the commit messages. Git push origin. Before I do that, let me make sure I am not on. All right, so once you've add, committed, and pushed, your work is saved there. If you ever want to revisit that little example and kind of play around with it, you could always come back to this repo and switch back to that branch. The work will still be there. But for now, what we're going to do is go back to the master branch. So when we go back to the master branch, it should take us back to kind of where we started yesterday, kind of back at the beginning. And then we will create a new branch called functional components. Can you guys even see that in the back? I mean, it's pretty washed out. I wonder if we turn off more of the lights, it'll help a little bit.
It's really hard to see it.
Yeah.
Better.
It's that sun coming right through that window right there. Being darker blinds. All right. Next, we want to open our code editor to this project. So if you're using VS Code, you type code space period. Open VS Code to this directory. If you're using PHP Storm, open it how you've been opening it, but then open the specific folder we're in. So with your code editor open, back to your terminal, and npm start to start your dev server. Once all that's up and running, go to localhost 3000, and you should see the welcome to React message again. Anybody need a second getting product? Okay. And once again, guys, I cannot stress or iterate enough. If you need a second, please say so. I would much rather wait a minute for you than you fall behind. All good? Thank you for letting me know. All right. So starting back square one where we're at. Right out the gate, this application is already using a component. So we are importing app from components/app. And then you notice when we import app, it starts with a capital letter. Any custom-made component you make has to start with a capital letter when you import it. Now, to stay with convention, even when you define it, you should start it with a capital letter. But because of the way the importing and exporting works, it really doesn't matter when you define it. But you should still call it the proper name, use a capital letter, keep everything matching to the best of your ability. And then notice when we actually use the app component, we do, instead of using it as a variable, we do it in kind of the markup looking way, where we put the less than, greater than signs around it. Also note that it is self-closing. You might have ran across, in your early days of doing HTML, I know it used to be one of the resources we use. I don't know if it's still around or not. But in HTML, you could self-close tags that don't have closing tags. Can someone give me an example of an HTML element that does not have a closing tag?
Image.
Image. Yes. Input. Link. So there's a few of them. There's BR tags, HR tags, all kinds of stuff. Any tag that does not have a closing tag in React, you have to self-close. Okay? So if you have an input or an image tag, you have to put that little slash at the end. Otherwise, it screws up your JSX and it doesn't know that there's ever an end to it. So all self-closing tags or tags without a closing tag must be self-closed. And we'll do an example of it in a second. All right, so we import app, and it's coming from components app.js. And although it's written in ES6, we'll build one in good old-fashioned ES5 first. But here's an example of a functional component. We save it into a constant called app. We use a fat arrow function. And then it is using parentheses to encompass the JSX. The parentheses mean what? Anybody remember? Parentheses versus curly brackets in a fat arrow function? It's an implied return. So implicit return. So everything inside those parentheses is automatically being returned from that function. Okay, so this is just kind of like a shorthand way to write a component. Also note that at the bottom, we are export default the component itself. Every component, with no exception, gets its own file. It doesn't matter how small or how big a component is, every component has its own file. No complaints or arguments? Normally there's complaints and arguments about it. You guys are too trusting. So let's build our first component and kind of walk through it. Trying to think what we could build. Oh yeah, we'll stick to the theme we've been using. So we'll do greeting. Trying to think of a different idea, but I couldn't. A lot of people, you'll see it's very common that they capitalize the first letter of their file names that are components. Very common practice. I don't like capitalizing any letters in file names, so I don't personally do that. But you will see that in a lot of places, and some places are going to enforce you that they want you to capitalize any file that contains a component. And if you want to start doing that now, feel free to. Just make sure your import statements match. All right. So whenever we're building a component, first thing we got to do is import React from React. Every time. All right, and then the definition of a functional component is a function that has a single parameter called props and returns some JSX. Right? So the full definition of a functional component, a function, single parameter, returns JSX. That is a functional component by definition. There are functional component slides, and on the first slide or two, it has that definition written out with a very similar example to what we're doing here. Once we've defined our component, we're happy with it. We need to export default the component.
Do all components start with capital?
Yes. Yeah, they have to. It doesn't matter as much in the file where you define it because since it's being exported default, you can import it with any name. But when you import it, it has to have a capital letter. So when you define it, it should have a capital letter too, so it matches. All right, so we've built our first component. Now we want to use our component. So to use our component, we will import it into another component that is already showing up on the screen. Well, one component that is already showing up on the screen is the app component. So if the app component's already showing up, that means we should be able to put our greeting component here and we should be able to see it. So up at the top of app.js, but before we do that, does anybody still need a second here? Everyone's good? So at the top of app.js, we will import greeting from greeting. And then just to reiterate, it's very important when you import a component, it has to be a capital letter. Capital letters are how React determines between a custom-built component and a standard HTML element. Okay, all HTML elements start with lowercase letters. So if you use a lowercase letter, it's going to look to where it stores all of the definitions for all the HTML elements. And it's not going to find an HTML element called greeting, so it's going to throw it in. Okay? So you have to start with a capital letter. It handles those a little bit differently than it does standard HTML elements. So I am going to get rid of the H1 and the image. I will leave the app container though. And then to use our component, wherever we want it to show up on the screen, we just say, call it by name, and then wrap it in less than and greater than sign. So how many of you guys are finding it hard to type this stuff out and it's not auto-completing at all? I imagine most of you probably. So if you are using VS Code, follow along, and then for those of you using PHP Storm, we'll do you next. Is there anybody using anything other than PHP Storm or VS Code? You're using Sublime, aren't you?
No, Adam.
Oh, okay. That one I don't know how to fix.
No,
I'm just good.
So if you're she's just leaving, I'm out. So if you're using VS Code, follow along real quick. Down in the bottom right corner, yours will probably say JavaScript down here. Go ahead and click on that. And then go to configure file association for .js. Configure file association for .js. Go ahead and click on that. That'll take you here. Type in React. And then click on JavaScript React. JavaScript React, not TypeScript React. So JavaScript React, that will associate any JS file you make as a React file. Now, if you're worried about, oh, I might be doing Node and that's going to screw anything up, it does not. I code in Node all the time, and I keep mine associated with React. You still get all the Node syntax highlighting. It still works fine. Okay, so you kind of get the best of both worlds. Who's using PHP Storm?
Unable to write.
Yeah, it should be. Yeah, here, give me 1 second. Let me get the PHP Storm people going, and then I'll come help you. How many people are using PHP Storms? Only 2 of you? So on PHP Storm, are you on Windows or Mac? Okay. Go to File, and then Settings. So go to File and then Settings. I was just thinking about it. And then in the left, go down to where it says Languages and Frameworks. And then click on JavaScript. And then in the drop-down menu, yours already has that. JSX and then 6. It's already associated. Okay, huh. Are you having problems when you're typing it, or is it working okay? Is the autocomplete and stuff working?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you're oh, but not for the JSX stuff. Stuff with the less than a greater than sign. Yeah, I mean it should. I mean, because it's set there, so sometimes it just takes a minute to update. It might have auto detected it. No, that's for TypeScript. I said that should work like that. Okay, yes, it's not good. No, it's working. Yeah. So like, just like you can in HTML, you can just type out your tag name.
Yes.
Use tag and go with it. If it wasn't JSX, that wouldn't work. Did you get your set okay?
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes a minute to update. It's not much
Yeah, he was already set to React.
Okay.
I think it was like yesterday, when I first started doing it.
Yeah.
I got a
It should be good then. Yeah, Adam, you're on your own, man. I don't. Yeah. Shouldn't be too hard to figure out.
Swiss cheese.
Mine's still not.
Oh yeah, no. And it should be. Oh, yes, it is. Errors, because there was errors in the. All right, well, since everyone's kind of taking a break, let's go ahead and take a quick break because I need to go to the bathroom too, so I might as well. A little bit early, but a lot of bit early, really. It's a Tuesday, you're right.